Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Cotton Candy by Shlomo Gronich.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
It's really odd for me to say his name. I want to say Shlomo Gronich, but it doesn't sound right. His name is like Shlomo Gronich. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So firstly, I want to open up this video by telling you all that I really would like to apologize. I'm sorry, sometimes things like this happen, it just occurs, it's a fault, you know how they say it, shit happens, it just does. And of course what I'm talking about is my occasional inclusion of a non-progressive album on the list, and unfortunately I believe that with today's pick, we have received an album that would be generally considered to be not progressive. You see, back when I made the list, I kind of got a lot, like a plethora of recommendations by many people, and at some point I just had to use common sense to see which albums would go on the list and which wouldn't, and my common sense were usually by looking at the people's names and trying to understand what they were or were not progressive artists, and you know, sometimes some things slipped between the fingers, and that's exactly what happened today. Now, to avoid this mistake happening on this list again, I've taken a few hours off my dig and I've sifted through the entire remaining list in search of albums which aren't progressive, which don't basically fit on the list. And so I've done, and I've actually located 10 albums which I personally don't believe have their spot on this list. So what happened is I took all of them out, so currently we have 10 open spaces waiting to be filled out on this year's list. And this is where you guys come in, because you see, I have a reserve list, but I wouldn't choose my own albums that I want to put on there. I want you guys watching this series to have your own voices heard. So what I've done is I've added a link in the description of this video. It will lead you to a Google form with about 40 recommendations for albums, and you can vote on at least 10 albums that you would like to see this year being reviewed. So please, for anyone watching this video, it will only take you a few seconds. I'd love to know which albums you want to hear, and I really want to get as many people as I can, so please go ahead and vote down in the list, and it will help me, and I'll update you all once I have the list updated. So for most of my worldwide viewers, the name Shlomo Gronich probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but the thing is, here in Israel, his name is pretty well renowned for a lot of his hit singles and a lot of the music that he made alone or with groups of people. I don't know why I found it important to say with groups of people, like he's made music with a bunch of giraffes. But the thing about Shlomo Gronich is he's not really your average pop artist. Actually, it's quite the contrary. Now, in order to understand the music of Shlomo Gronich, we have to at least a bit understand progressive rock in Israel. You see, unlike most of the world, progressive rock hasn't really reached the mainstream Israel up until the mid-70s. And the thing about it, it didn't really have a long longevity over there because it quickly dissipated towards the end of the 70s in favor of punk and pop. So this is generally why progressive music always had to some extent maneuver its way through music in Israel, because progressive rock, like genuine progressive rock, couldn't really succeed, and most progressive artists who have made some sort of success were usually ones who were able to incorporate some sort of accessibility into their progressive music. And this is exactly where Shlomo Gronich comes in, because he's known to be one of the best crossover prog artists in Israel, being basically able to always somehow create progressive music, but at the same time make it accessible enough so that people will actually go ahead and listen to it. And he's done so alone in his solo career, but as well in various groups and bands he's been a part of. And now in hindsight, what is probably considered to be the best work he's ever done, at least inside of a group setting, is with a group called Ktsat Acheret, which means a little different, and these guys created one of the coolest, more interesting progressive rock albums that Israel has to offer, and it's an album that I personally come back to a whole lot of times. Now, as for his solo career, Shlomo Gronich has always been known to be someone who has a lot of interest and knows how to incorporate those in his music. Now, generally, I would have to say that Cotton Candy is a jazz rock fusion album, but at the same time it's very much a crossover prog album as well to some degree, and unfortunately overall what ties everything together at the end of the day is this one being a pop album that, to me at least, takes a lot of the charm of what this could have been. The only track on here which I would actually say is a real progressive rock track and very experimental in some way is a track called Amusement Park, which incidentally is the only track on here which lyrics weren't actually written by Shlomo Gronich's wife, but instead by himself. I don't know, I'm just putting that out there. And this album is supposed to be a very expressionistic rendition of a popular children's song in Israel, and I believe that if this entire album was more like this song, I would have loved it a whole lot more. But unfortunately, this album is basically pop music with borderline experimentalism, which unfortunately I couldn't really dig into all that much. I wouldn't say that I suffered through this album per se. I think it was pretty nice to listen to, but I really find it hard to actually connect with the songs on here, and it really genuinely didn't happen organically, which is something that I didn't really like about this album. So in conclusion, I wouldn't say that this album is necessarily bad, and if I had to call something Israeli prog, I would actually call this an Israeli prog album, because this is what defined the genre. Unfortunately, bands like Zingale or Atmosfera, despite being very progressive as we're used to in the West, didn't really make it in the scene, and people like Shlomo Gronich and albums like these were the representing ones for the Israeli prog scene. So honestly, and I don't really say that a lot, but if you're watching this and you're not from Israel, I wouldn't really recommend this album for you. I don't think there's a lot to find on here. For anyone who's following this list like I am doing, well, I guess you're gonna have to listen to this one, but there's really not a lot to be found on it, especially not on the progressive front. So this is a neat little cover. I think it's pretty nice, and mostly for the colors being used on here. I always love when a cover uses like 2 or 3 main colors, and this one of course has the yellow, pink and green combination, which looks pretty nice. Of course you have Shlomo Gronich himself in the middle of this cover, looking with a very much ambiguous face expression on him. I really don't know how to read his face in this type of setting. I think it looks pretty nice. I really like the pink thing that's covering the cloth or whatever. It kind of connects with the name of this album to me, and I find this to be pretty nice, but overall I really don't have a lot to say about what's being shown on this cover. So this album, it isn't special, but it also isn't inherently bad as well, so I think I'm gonna give it a pretty fitting rating of 6 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Meditates by Blue Effect. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum. You are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.